This is a mixed class from St. Andrew's Church in Kitchener, taking the lessons for the month of May. It's the first teaching of the lessons throughout that whole period. The children are 9 and 10 years of age. When you were very little people, I mean about half the age that you are now, or perhaps even a little less, and you thought of God, you thought about him in a very particular way. As a matter of fact, if someone asked you, what was God like to you when you were a youngster about 4 years old, what would you have said? Kenneth?
I call him a kind old man.
That's right. I think that's almost true of all of you. Is that true of you, Barbara? Did you think of him as a kind old man?
Yes, I did.
That's right. Well, there's only one little mistake there when it comes to the way I thought about him when I was your age. I didn't always think of him as a kind old man. I thought about him in another way sometimes. John, how else have you thought of him?
He sometimes gets very angry.
That's right. As a matter of fact, you thought of him as a man, kindly, old, sometimes angry. In our prayers, we refer to him as a particular kind of man. Mary Lynn?
Like a father?
Is your father sometimes cross and sometimes kind?
Yes.
Yes, that's perfectly true. So we can say that when he's a father, that's being sometimes kind and sometimes cross. And we'd come to know him that way. We'd come to love him as a kindly father. Now, of course, when we got a little older, and you began to grow up, and you became young ladies and young gentlemen, you began to see that God couldn't really be a man, just as your father is a man. Why did that happen in your thinking? How did you come to think of it that way? Mary Sue? Can you think of any way that told you that God couldn't have been a man just like your father?
He could be a spirit.
Well, he could be a spirit, but how did you know that he was something other than a man? Kenneth?
No man could be all the way around the world at once.
That's right, he couldn't be present everywhere. Is there any other reason that any of you can think why you knew that he couldn't possibly have been an ordinary type of man? Can any think of anything else? Yes, John?
An ordinary man couldn't make the world.
That's true. He couldn't do the wonderful things that God did. He couldn't be everywhere. And so we had then began to think of him not as a man, but as a what, Mary Lynn?
As a spirit?
That's perfectly true. And we actually have a definition for God then that we've come to memorize. Do any of you really know the definition that we have? We call it a catechism. And in that catechism question, it would just say, what is God? Who will try to tell me just what that catechism question says? All right, try it.
God is a spirit, infinite, eternal in his being, unchangeable, just unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, justice, holiness, goodness, and truth.
That's almost perfect. And that's our definition for God as spirit. But we know that while he is a spirit, there's something about like a man about him too. What can that spirit do, or what must that spirit do that a man also does? We do something with our head. Now, what do you do with your head, Nancy?
I think.
That's true. And this spirit can think. Is there anything else that this spirit does besides thinking? Yes?
He can plan things.
That's true. This is a spirit that can plan and a spirit that can think. And there's the definition that we have of him. So, and he's everywhere. This wonderful spirit, then, there's one thing we would like to know about him, I'm sure. That if we came down to earth and they told us about this wonderful, kindly, father-like spirit that was everywhere and could think and could plan and who made the earth, we would want to ask one question. Can he do what? Kenneth? Can he do what?
Can he talk?
That's perfectly true. Can he talk and can he speak? And actually, during the course of the month, we are going to study the ways in which he can speak to us. He speaks to us in quite a variety of ways. As a matter of fact, if I have 10 cents, and I have 10 cents, have you 10 cents? No one else has 10 cents, so I'll have to use my own. And I take this 10 cents and I just drop it. It fell down to the floor. Why did it fall to the floor, Kenneth?
Law of gravity.
That's right. It couldn't do anything else. Who made the law of gravity, Barbara?
Well, I made the law of gravity.
We certainly did. And we made all sorts of great physical laws like that that you can't disobey. If you were up in a 13-story window and you jumped out, that law of gravity would do something to you. What would it do to it?
You'd probably break your arms, legs.
You'd just break everything. Perhaps the law of gravity wouldn't do it, but when you stopped at the ground, it would certainly break everything. You can't disobey the law of gravity. God made them. But not only did he make these physical laws, what other kind of laws did he make? Yes, Mary Lou?
He made the moral law.
That's perfectly true. And you can't break those moral laws without just having almost the same effect as breaking a physical law. You're going to be broken. Perhaps not your arm broken, but you're going to be broken in very much the same way. Where would you find God's moral law, Mary Sue? Where would you find them if you were going to look for them? What are they called? Yes?
They're called the Ten Commandments.
Supposing we just repeat one or two of them. Nancy, would you repeat one for me that you can remember?
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
That's true. Would you repeat one, Mary Sue, that you happen to remember?
Honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee.
And would you repeat one you know?
Thou shalt not kill.
And Barbara?
Thou shalt not steal.
There are 10 of them in all, God's moral laws, and he speaks to us through his law. But not only does he speak to us through his law, but he speaks to us every hour of the day. Today and yesterday and last year and the year before that, the century before that, God speaks to us in what? What do we call this passing of time? Yesterday, today, and way back into the distance. John?
In history?
That's right. When you're studying in your class in school what happened a few years ago, we call it history. And God speaks in history. Joshua tells his people that God spoke very really in history, taking care of the chosen people, preserving them from their enemies, so that God is speaking all the time in history. Now, what the first voice we heard was his voice in the voice of, yes?
Voice of law.
And the second voice is the voice of God in, yes?
In history?
That's perfectly true. So not only has he spoken in those two ways, but he's also spoken in another way. You remember that when he created man in his own image, and he wanted him to be his own son and enjoy all the richness of the earth, man had one thing to do, and that was obey God. He disobeyed him. What was the story of the disobedience? What was the story of the disobedience, John?
Story of Adam and Eve.
That's perfectly true. And when he disobeyed and he lost his rightful place with God, God wanted to win him back, and he tried to win him back, first of all, by cleansing the earth. What's that story of the cleansing of the earth, yes?
By flood?
That's perfectly true, and that failed. And then for many hundreds of years, the voice of God came to his people trying to win them back through certain kinds of people. Yes, Kenneth?
Through prophets.
That's perfectly true. Can you, Marilyn, give me some of the prophets that have spoken down through history?
Isaiah and Jeremiah.
And what did the prophets say? What did prophets say? What kind of message would they bring to the people? Yes, Kenneth?
They were telling them that God would come down in the form of his son to try and cleanse the world.
Yes, that was true. That was one thing they said, but even before that they said, you be good or else. You be good or else. Now that's exactly what the prophets were saying for centuries, but man still disregarded him. So you have Jeremiah and Isaiah and all these prophets speaking through hundreds of years. That was God's voice. It was God's voice in history. It was God's voice in law. And then we had some folk who put the words into a very beautiful fashion. And they used all kinds of imagination and beauty. When you see words that are written down with beauty and imagination, what kind of writing do you call that? Anyone Yes, Nancy?
Poetry?
That's perfectly true, poetry. And if you were looking for some poetry in the Bible, to what particular book of the Bible would you look, Mary Lynn?
Song of Solomon or the Psalms?
That's right, the Songs of Solomon or the Psalms. And they beautifully express God's Word with all sorts of wonderful pictures. We still have poets in our own day who, perhaps not like living today, but who lived not so long ago, who spoke beautifully wonderful things about God and nature. Mary Sue, can you remember some of the still speaking, and we read and study about them in school? Yeah?
Wordsworth and Tennyson?
That's right. So that God has been speaking down through the years in poets and in prophets and in history and in law. And then he still speaks through a very important type of person. Yes, Mary Lynn?
Wise men?
That's right. There have been wise men in every generation. Who were the wise men who spoke in the Bible? At least, what book did the wise men write in the Bible? Yes?
In the Proverbs? Proverbs?
That's right, in the book of Proverbs, and many wonderful things are said there. You should memorize them, and I think we will in the days to come memorize some of the very wonderful things that are said by wise men in the book of Proverbs. We have wise men today in our own generation, great leaders. What wise man led us through the problems of the last great war? Kenneth?
Prime Minister Churchill?
That's right, and he said many wise and wonderful things that you still read about in school and your fathers and mothers remember. Now, there are 5 ways in which God speaks to us. Who can tell me those 5 ways? Because by the end of the month, I want you all to know the whole 5 ways in which God speaks. Who will take a chance on that? All right, you try it first.
The law, the prophets, the wise men, the poets,
And the passing of time, what's that?
history.
History. Who else will try to tell me the whole 5 of them and not make a slip? Would you like to try, John?
The prophets, the law, the poets, the history,
And fellows like myself.
the wise men.
That's right. I'm awfully glad I gave you that gift. And they're still doing it. They're still speaking. God's still speaking in the same way. But there was one particular way in which God spoke down through the years. And he's never going to speak quite that way again. What was that one particular way that God spoke? Yes, Kenneth?
He spoke through Jesus Christ.
And what do we call Jesus Christ? What relationship to God the Father? Yes, John?
The Son of God.
That's right. God made a perfectly new creation. God came down to earth himself in Jesus Christ to show all men what he was like, to win them back to him, to enjoy the good things he had prepared for them from the beginning of the world. And that very particular revelation, that new and particular way was called what, Nancy? That new way of God coming down and speaking to us in who?
And his son?
In his Son, Jesus Christ. So really, there are 5 ordinary ways that God speaks, and one very particular way in which you must never forget. Now, Stella, I'm going to ask you to give the 5 general ways in which God speaks. All right? The first is,
Through law,
and the second is,
history,
and the third,
business,
and the fifth.
Jesus Christ.
No. No. People who warned.
Prophets.
That's right. And then one unusual, particular way that he spoke once and for all. Mary Lynn?
To Jesus Christ.
That's right. All together. The one great way that God speaks and keeps speaking to us is in the person of
Jesus Christ.
our living Lord. Now there's the lessons for the month of May.